see her.
Got here. All right, welcome to the September 9th, 2019 Salina City Commission meeting. As for the meeting be brought to order and roll call.
Mayor Davis.
Here.
Commissioner Hay.
Here.
Commissioner Hodges.
Here.
Commissioner Hoppick.
Here.
Commissioner Ryan.
Here. Okay, if you're able, please stand for the Pledge of Allegiance and a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Looks like we have 3 awards and proclamations today.
Item 3.1, the month of September 2019 is National Recovery Month in the city of Salina. Don Green, Senior Recovery Coach, will read the proclamation.
Thank you.
Hello there.
Join the voices of recovery. Together we are stronger. National Recovery Month. Mental and substance use disorders affect all communities nationwide, but with the commitment and support, people with these disorders can achieve healthy lifestyles and lead rewarding lives in recovery. By seeking help, people who experience mental and substance use disorders can embark on a new path towards an improved health and overall wellness. The focus of National Recovery Month this September is to celebrate their journey with the theme, Join the Voices of Recovery. Together we are stronger. Recovery Month spreads the message that behavioral health is essential to health and one's overall wellness, and that prevention works, treatment is effective, and people recover. The impact of mental and substance use disorders is apparent in our local community, and an estimated 43.6 million people in the United States are affected by these conditions. Through Recovery Month, people become more aware and able to recognize the signs of mental and substance use disorders, which can lead more people into needed treatment. Managing the effects of these conditions can help people achieve healthy lifestyles both physically and emotionally. The Recovery Month observance continues to work and improve the lives of those affected by mental and substance use disorders by raising awareness of these diseases and educating communities about the prevention, treatment, and recovery resources that are available. For the above reason, I am asking the citizens of Saline County to join me in celebrating this September as National Recovery Month.
Thank you very much. I'm going to give you a signed copy of the proclamation. Are there any events in
Yes, sir.
Salina
We're having
this
our,
month?
at CKF Addictions Treatment, we're having our second annual Run for Recovery 5K and 1 mile fun run. And that is September 14th at 8 a.m. at our new location at 617 East Elm, Salina, Kansas. Following then, it's $20 for 18 and under for the race and $30 19 and up. And with the first 100, there's a free t-shirt with that. After the race, if you're a little hungry and maybe need a drink a glass of pink lemonade, we're having a day of free fun for the whole family as we celebrate National Recovery Month. And that is Saturday, September 14th from 11:30 a.m. to 3 at 617 East Elm. We're going to have free live music featuring the Lou Brown Band from Wichita, Kansas. Barbecue, we're going to have hamburgers and hot dogs, iced tea, pink lemonade. We're also going to have a dunk tank, a balloon artist, and a bounce house for the kids. Face painting by Color Me Crazy is also going to be there. Plus, we'll have a silent auction and raffle tickets for opportunities to win great prizes. Please join us. If you ever sit on the seat in a dunk tank, you really haven't lived. I'm telling you, the adrenaline is amazing.
Sounds like a very fun day. Come on.
Yeah.
Sounds like a role for the mayor.
Thank you very much, Mayor. Thank you, Commissioners.
Sounds like a role for the mayor.
Item 3.2, the week of
I
September
don't swim well enough.
8th through the 14th, 2019 is Assisted Living Week in the city of Salina. Mary Kay Larson will read the proclamation.
Whereas the residents of assisted living communities are active members of the larger community, offering their knowledge, life experiences, and involvement, their past contributions continue to be a vital part of Salina, Kansas's rich history, and their ongoing participation deepens in our Saline County, Salina, Kansas identity. Whereas assisted living is a critical long-term care option for older adults and individuals with disabilities that fosters choice, dignity, and independence, assisted living communities are committed to excellence, innovation, and the advancement of person-centered care. Whereas in 1995, the National Center for Assisted Living established a National Assisted Living Week to honor the contributions of assisted living communities in providing long-term care to American seniors with individuals with disabilities. Whereas this year's theme is the National Assisted Week, this is a spark of creativity which hopes to inspire assisted residents to explore their creative side, whether through the arts or beyond. Whereas, according to the Art Therapy Association, American Art Therapy Association, art therapy can offer many benefits to older adults and individuals with disabilities, including improving cognitive and sensory motor functions, fostering self-esteem and self-awareness, cultivating emotional resilience, and enhancing social skills, and reducing and resolving conflicts and distress. Whereas a spark of creativity is also meant to encourage assisted living staff to help think creatively and continue to explore new, innovative ways to deliver high-quality, personal-centered care. Whereas during this week, assisted living communities across the country are encouraged to organize activities and events which celebrate individuality of residents, the dedication of our staff, and the deep connections formed in these settings. Now, therefore, I, Trent W. Davis, MD, Mayor, do hereby proclaim the week of September the 8th through the 14th of 2019 as Assisted Living Week in Salina, Kansas. I urge all citizens to volunteer in an assisted living community, to visit friends and loved ones who reside in these communities, and to learn about and how to assist living services in Salina, Kansas. And I am one of these that are being served, and I appreciate the assisted living here in Salina. Now, like to know what we,
I surely would.
on Tuesday, and this week, this is open to everybody, we welcome you all. On Tuesday, creative critters from Lakewood are going to be brought over to us. On Wednesday, the 11th, is Patriot Day. We're going to have helium-filled balloons. We'll go out into the park, into the center, and let our balloons go and see where they'll launch. We hope to put something in them, and maybe we can find out where they went. And on the Thursday is Sparkling Brookdale Babies. That's where we're from, Brookdale, Kerwin. And we have the pictures of all of us residents, and I think the staff too, of babies or young children, try to guess who they are. So come, you'll enjoy that. And then on Friday is Fiesta Friday at 1:45, a fiesta party. And Saturday is Family Noon Meal. You come and have lunch with us, and we invite you all to come and appreciate this.
Which park are all these at one
All at-
location?
At Salina, Kerwin, Brookdale,
I'm going to bring this down to you.
okay?
And while Mayor Davis is walking that down, I just wanted to thank you all for a wonderful lunch today. I had a wonderful time at Brookdale Kerwin. It was great to meet everybody, and you run a lovely facility. Thanks again.
Don't forget, I think the most important, I hate to even call this volunteering, but go visit someone. That may be the most important act that you do. It can get kind of lonely when folks don't show up and say hi. Everybody likes to feel remembered. Thank you.
Item 3.3, the month of September 2019 is Childhood Cancer Awareness Month in the city of Salina. Carly Eilert, mother of childhood cancer Angel, will read the proclamation.
Hi there, I'm Carly Eilert, and I lost my daughter Allie to leukemia in 2015. She was 3.5 years old. And so I'm here on behalf of the Love Chloe Foundation, which is a local childhood cancer foundation. Whereas childhood cancer remains the #1 disease killer of children, more than genetic anomalies, cystic fibrosis, and AIDS combined. And whereas on average the treatment for childhood cancer is 2 years and can cause serious side effects that may last a lifetime. And whereas every year more than 15,700 children and adolescents are diagnosed with cancer, which is about 43 children each day. And whereas childhood cancer occurs regularly, randomly, and spares no socioeconomic class, geographic affiliation, gender, or ethnic group. And whereas 60% of children who survive cancer suffer late effects such as infertility, heart failure, and secondary cancers. And whereas every year over 2,500 children under the age of 20 lose their lives to cancer, which is equivalent to 7 children every single day. And whereas when a child is diagnosed with cancer, the entire family is forever affected. Therefore, in recognition of support of the patients, families, and professionals leading the fight against childhood cancer, I, Trent Davis, MD, Mayor of the City of Salina, do hereby proclaim September 2019 as Childhood Cancer Awareness Month in Salina and recognize the gold ribbon as the symbol of childhood cancer. I encourage all citizens to honor those young people who have lost their lives to the devastating disease and join the fight against childhood cancer in Salina.
Thank you. Are there any community?
Yes, we do have some
Activities.
events coming up. Saturday, September 14th is the 12th annual Love Chloe Kickball Jam. It starts at 8 a.m. and there's 14 teams this year, raffles, bounce house, food and fun. Sunday, September 29th, we are doing a Love Chloe Family Day for Central families impacted by childhood cancer. It'll be at Rolling Hills Zoo, and families will get lunch, zoo and museum admission, and special gifts. Saturday, October 12th, will be the Pinwheels for Allie Gala. This is our 3rd annual gala in memory of my daughter, Allie. It's a dinner and auction, and it starts at 6 p.m. And then the following day, we do a golf tournament. That's a 4-person scramble that starts at 9. Last year, the 2nd annual year, we raised $78,000 for childhood cancer, and that's after expenses. So we are super proud of that, and we appreciate the support of Salina that we've gotten so far, and continue to hope to make it a great success. If you want any more information on this stuff, you can go to lovechloe.org. And the gold ribbon represents childhood cancer awareness. Thank you.
Thank you. If you want to come forward, I'll
yeah.
give you a signed copy. Or not a signed copy, but the signed original.
Thank you.
So there is no reason for anyone in Salina to be at home on September the 14th. I mean, it sounds like a fairly full day. We now come to the Citizens Forum, which is an opportunity for anyone to come to the podium to address the commission on any item that's not on the agenda. We only ask that your comments be limited to 5 minutes. Just give your name to the clerk.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Boy, all of this stuff, mine doesn't compare to that, but it's an issue on my street with my neighbors. My name is Rick Tillett. I live at 1112 Windsor Drive. And it concerns South Broadway behind my house. The maintenance of the ditches on South Broadway has been atrocious at best this year. Last year, somewhere, the city wanted us, the adjacent homeowners, to mow and trim half of the ditch behind our house. The city would see to it that the other part next to the street would be done. All of our neighbors are, well, I'm going to say they're elderly, 80s. They have no business being down in those ditches, mowing, trimming. I have no business. I'm handicapped, have been for 20 years. And I'm 65. But my issues keep me from going down in that ditch. I wish the city, the commissioners, would address that issue once again and reconsider having the homeowners be responsible for behind that fence, because none of us have business being back there. It's to me, it's a big liability, and I would like to see that addressed, and I would also like to see paint on the curbing on the dividers in the street. Now, you can go all the way down South 9th Street, and the city, quit painting the curbs on the corners, on the medians. That, to me, is a big safety issue, and it should be #1 priority. But what I've been told is that the city of Salina does not do that anymore because the state of Kansas doesn't require it. So how many times have we as a city not listened to the state of Kansas? Okay. It's a safety hazard. It truly is. You go out there on Schilling Road and 9th Street at nighttime, you cannot see the ends of those medians sticking out there. Somebody's going to run over them, flip their car, get hurt. There's going to be lawsuits. I could see it, when it's snowy, rainy, all of that. I think it's a big safety concern. And, if we can spend $150 million on the downtown area, can't we skim some money from that and buy some paint? I'll even help you paint them. I just think it's a big safety concern. It truly is. And I would like to see the medians painted again. And I think a lot of other people would also like to see that done. I think common sense would tell you to do it. So, thank you for hearing me out.
Thank you for bringing that to us. Can those be forwarded to the
They can.
appropriate department?
And Mr. Tilley mentioned kind of a policy change. It was actually an ordinance change, so we can provide you some summary information about what our ordinances currently provide and how that's administered as it relates to the mowing. I think we can also speak to the curb painting. I don't want to get ahead of staff, but we definitely identified that we have a sizable linear feet of curbing that's painted and failing, and we're actually trying to find a way to remove that paint because it's an ongoing maintenance issue. With respect to identifying the curbs, as a little bit of a side note, I was getting gas at that showing a 9th Street intersection and heard someone inadvertently straddle that median and run over a sign, and it was quite a calamity. But my point is, signage actually sticks up above the snow, and I think there's alternate ways to call drivers' attention to the median rather than painted curbs, and they may be easier to maintain. But we can kind of give you some background information about that as well.
It is a big safety thing. It truly is. You know, I hate to see somebody go down for something that could have been prevented.
Well, and-
Out of curiosity, does the city make allowances when residents truly physically could not mow their portion, either provide it for a low cost
Right.
or just take over that service for
The
them?
code provides for some exceptions due to the width of the right-of-way, the steepness of the terrain, and whether it's impractical to maintain. I don't recall whether, physical ability of the property owner is a consideration, since they can contract to have it done. But there are some exceptions that are provided for in the ordinance.
All right. We'll get back with you. Thank you.
And if I could just add,
I'm sorry.
no, if I could
Commissioner
just
Hodges.
add one thing to the curb painting issue. It was a concern when I was at Salina downtown, and we tried water blasting it, sand blasting it, scraping it, and I think at some point we realized that the only way that we were going to be able to deal with it is either to repaint it or to tear out that curbing and pour new curbing. So if it gets to a point where we can't identify a way to safely remove that paint, I would, and I can't speak for anybody else up here, but I'd sure like to revisit that policy so that we could get that cleaned up, because I know that a strategic goal that we always list is that Salina's going to have good housekeeping and look like we're trying to take care of ourselves. And when you see the chipped yellow paint, that just is completely at odds with that strategic goal, in my opinion.
And your description about our efforts to try to remove the paint is completely accurate until about 2 weeks ago. Staff outside the building where the angled parking went in on Ash Street feels like they found the right combination of temperature and water pressure, and they were able to successfully remove paint off of that curb section right in front of the city-county building. So we're a little optimistic that maybe we found the right approach.
Awesome.
Either that or Mark, some of these areas look like some sort of a reflective post.
Come back. Yeah.
What about a reflective post type setup right on the ends of the medians? I mean, something that's going to reflect light at night would be an immense help. Okay? Doesn't have to be the international yellow or bright white paint. I mean, if there's an issue with the paint, let's look at, things that stand above the ground. I mean, it might be an issue to the city. Well, if somebody hits them, then we got to replace them type situation. I don't know what to say other than it's an idea. It's something that, could be tossed around and discussed. But I really think those medians, the dividers on South 9th Street that they made of brick, and they're only about so high, and you can drive your car right up over them. I think those also need to be distinguished with a color. And I've seen people they'll be clear over in the left lane or right lane and go left, and they go right over that. That's a left turn divider. Okay, it's not something that somebody's supposed to just take off and go right on over, to make their left-hand turn. I've seen it so many times. And I've even seen people almost get run off the road because they've done it. But I think if people see that it's clearly marked with a yellow paint of some sort, they won't be as apt to try to pull something like that. I really don't. And I don't know why, but I just don't think they would do it as often as I've seen it done. So I just think that the whole thing is a safety issue, and I think first and foremost, as a city council, that safety would be first and foremost on our list.
One thing we do have is a good think tank. We will
Okay.
put it out there on the
I'd
table.
appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? We can move on to the consent agenda.
Item 6.1, approve the minutes of August 26, 2019.
Consent agenda's been real easy the last 3 weeks, so take advantage of it.
Mayor Davis, I move we approve consent agenda item 6.1.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve the consent agenda, which are minutes from our last meeting. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Administration, 7.1.
Item 7.1, resolution number 19-7737, setting the date for a public hearing to consider whether a dangerous structure at 236 South 4th Street shall be condemned and ordered demolished or repaired.
Mr. Pilcher, how you doing?
Hi, Sean Pilcher, building official for the city. A little bit of background on this dangerous structure process. When a building inspector is on site for a building evaluation, whether it's from a citizen complaint, a post-fire investigation, or an area evaluation, he or she uses the property maintenance code as a basis for evaluation. There are many areas of concern. If there are many areas of concern with the property, especially problems that are structural in nature, the inspector would consult with the building official for determination if a dangerous structure evaluation is warranted. Properties are evaluated on the basis of the criteria listed in Salina Municipal Code 31-502.1 for classification of a dangerous structure. The code reads that if any of the criteria listed apply to the structure, it shall be considered dangerous. Once that inspection is complete, the results are assessed by the building official and a determination is made on the status of the property. Kansas statutes annotated sections 12-1750 through 1756F provide the authority and the required procedures that the cities can take to eliminate dangerous structures. The first step in the process is to formally call a public hearing to be conducted by the City Commission. The purpose of the public hearing is to allow the owner's agent, lien holders of record, and occupant of the property to appear and show cause as to why such structures should not be ordered to be repaired or demolished. An inspection of the structures was performed by the building official and building inspectors using criteria listed in Chapter 31, Article 5 of the Salina Municipal Code. Since this action items is just setting the public hearing and consideration of the property details is to take place at the public hearing. Detailed information about the property isn't given at this time. The inspection report with supporting documentation and details will be shared with all the related parties and provided as a part of the public hearing process. As a brief summary, this is a fire damaged property that has significant structural damage to the area where the fire occurred. You can see attachment A. I've listed, given you some pictures of the property in question. With the adoption of Resolution 19-7737, the following timeline will be set in motion. On September 13th, 2019, the first publication of the resolution. September 16, 2019, a certified copy of the resolution to each property owner and all identified parties of interest, including lien holders. September 20th would be the second publication of the resolution. October 21st, the public hearing would take place. The City Commission would consider a resolution ordering repair or removal of the structure located at 236 South 4th Street. If at the public hearing, the City Commission determines the property is dangerous, dates will be set for a commencement and completion of repairs or demolition by the property owner. If the Commission does not agree with the building official's determination, the property will be dealt with in the same manner as other property maintenance issues, which could include referral to municipal court if corrections are not made. As a fiscal note for this, adoption of the resolution to set a public hearing has no immediate fiscal impact. If, at the public hearing, remediation or demolition becomes necessary at the city's expense, the city has funds from the insurance proceeds from the fire in the amount of $8,430. If the city's costs to remediate the structure exceed that amount, the property owner would be billed the remainder of the expenses, and that amount is due payable within 30 days. If the property owner does not pay the billed amount within 30 days, then the amount is assessed to the property upon request by the Finance Department and approval by the City Commission. The amount due becomes property tax assessment and payable to the Salina County Treasurer and ultimately reimbursed to the city if paid. If the property owner does not pay the assessment, then the property taxes and/or assessments become delinquent and subject to further action by Salina County, including a possible tax sale of the property. Recommended or action for today would be number 1, adopt resolution 197737, setting October 21st as the public hearing date for the dangerous structure located at 236 South 4th Street. Number 2, amend and adopt resolution 197737, setting an alternative date as the public hearing date for the dangerous structure located at 236 South 4th Street. Postpone the item with direction to staff regarding further information or action, or decline to set a public hearing for a dangerous structure. Staff would recommend option number 1. And if you guys have any questions, I'd be happy to try and answer them at this time.
Question? Would this be time for the owner to make any comments, or just reserve that for the
Certainly,
hearing?
as part of the public comment, if they're here, they're welcome to do so. But the intention is not necessarily to try the matter at this
right.
time,
Just
it's
to
just to
set
set that
the
public hearing date.
All right. Any comments from the public? Okay, thank you, Mr. Pilcher. Any action to be taken by the commission?
Mayor, I move we adopt resolution number 197737, setting October 21st, 2019 as the public hearing date for the dangerous structure located at 236 South 4th Street.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve Resolution 19-7737. Any other questions, comments? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Item 7.2.
Item 7.2, accept bid from Bennington State Bank for private placement of general obligation temporary note series 2019-2.
Ms. Pack, how you doing?
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor and Commissioners. The city currently holds temporary notes for the financing of the police training facility. These notes currently mature on November 15th, 2019. As the police training facility project has been delayed, permanent financing is not expected to occur until the project is under construction sometime in 2020. On August 19th, the City Commission approved Resolution 19-7735, authorizing staff to pursue a private placement of general obligation temporary notes, Series 2019-2, to retire those maturing notes. Private placement of these temporary notes was recommended and approved by City Commission due to the short term of the temporary notes to be issued and the likely savings realized by private placement compared to the bond issuance costs that would be incurred for public offering. It should be noted that the bond issuance costs are incorporated in the total amount financed, resulting in increased the initial amount borrowed. Tonight I have Mr. Roger Edgar with me if we have additional questions as far as the placement and the process. On August 23rd, term sheets were distributed to about 12 area financial institutions. On September 4th, we received back 3 bids, one from Bennington State Bank for 2.07%, one from Sunflower Bank at 2.55%, and one from UMB Bank at 2.3%. As part of the process, we asked George K. Baum to do an analysis of what the cost would be to the city if we actually did go out for a public offering. And on the second page, he's kind of given us some estimates of what that might be. Those numbers that he came up with were that the total P&I for a private placement with Bennington would be $5,142,308. And if the estimates can't hold true, the public offering could be about $5,140,234, a difference of a little over $2,000. As we can see in the information, the rates for the private offering are a little bit higher, but the cost to issue an official statement of bond rating call add an additional cost to the city of a public offering. In consultations with George K. Baum, and because the difference is minimal, staff recommends that the city proceed with the private placement of the temporary notes with Bennington State Bank because they offered the lowest interest rate, resulting in the lowest total cost to the city for a private placement of the proposed temporary notes. Other benefits to placing this local is it gives us some flexibility in case we need to extend the terms, or we need to shorten the terms, or we just need to do something else with these notes because of the uncertainty of our long-term financing. Our local banks are a little easier are able to make those adjustments for us. This action is being presented to you today in order to allow us sufficient time in the event that you would choose for us to go to a public offering. By accepting the bid from Bennington State Bank, you would allow staff and bond counsel to prepare and present a resolution authorizing the issuance, sale, and delivery of the notes, and authorize the mayor to sign the note purchase agreement on September 23rd, 2019. The fiscal note for this action is that these notes will eventually be permanently financed with general obligation bonds, probably issued in 2020, and that debt is budgeted to be funded out of the sales tax revenue fund. Action items. Options are to accept the bid from Bennington State Bank for private placement of temporary notes series 2019-2. Do not accept the bid from Bennington State Bank and direct staff to go out for public offering of the temporary notes, or postpone consideration of acceptance of the bid to a specified time and date and provide staff with direction regarding additional information that you might need to make a decision. I can stand for questions, or Mr. Edgar can stand for questions, whichever.
Start from the left this time. None? No? Okay. On this side.
Oh, I just had one question. It's not for Mr. Edgar. Does the 4.945, does that include the addendum that we've got coming up on the police training? I just wanted to confirm that it did. I thought that's what I got from your city manager
Right.
update. I just wanted to make sure.
The 4.45 is to pay off the notes that we currently have. It does not add additional funding. We will add any additional funding when we do permanent financing in the fall. Because we don't anticipate that we're going to pay out all of that money before we finance in the spring. Sorry, spring, not fall, if that makes sense.
So the financing is less than the full project cost, but the addendum that's on your agenda planner coming up is still within the most recent numbers that we shared with you for the project.
Great, thank you.
That's true. Any other questions?
Nope. Thank you. Any questions, comments from the public? Okay, bring it back to the commission.
Mr. Mayor, I move we accept bid from Bennington State Bank for private placement of the temporary notes series 2019-2.
Second. Okay, it's been moved and seconded to accept the bid from Bennington State Bank for private placement of general obligation temporary notes, Series 2019-2. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Item 7.3.
Item 7.3, authorize the city manager to sign a request from the Kansas Department of Transportation to exchange 2019 federal funds for the 9th Street Curb and Gutter Improvements, City Project Number 90001.
Mr. Stack. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. This is our annual program that from the outset doesn't look like a good deal, but we believe it's a good deal for the city. Normally, Public agencies around the state get federal transportation dollars, federal aid dollars, based on kind of each district in the state gets them, and then they divide it up among the cities, and then it's more of a competition to a certain extent between the different cities that are in there and for the projects, and there's only certain projects you can use the federal aid dollars for. So Salina over the years has gotten some dollars from KDOT, or from the federal government through KDOT for South Ohio is a good example of one. The south of Magnolia, some of the 9th Street corridor was done with federal aid dollars. Of course, the North Ohio overpass was a big part of that at one time as well. So for widenings and for bigger projects, it definitely makes sense to try to use those dollars and have KDOT oversight to a certain extent. However, with the federal fund exchange program, this is more of an annual allotment that we can have to kind of budget for and use with a lot more flexibility. And over the years, we've tried to figure out, okay, what does it cost, the city to do a federal aid project? So for a big project, you can, it seems like you can negate some of those costs that KDOT requires. When they actually oversee a project, it takes quite a bit longer because it goes through a lot more reviews. So the design costs are increased. The construction engineering part of it, you have to hire construction engineers, inspectors basically, to more of those because they have a lot more measurement requirements and testing requirements, which all the things are good things. Some of those are good, and a lot of our inspectors can do those things, but the sheer number and volume that you have to do with a KDOT project is just a lot more than our staff can handle. So when we do that, we have to sub out the construction engineering. And the design just takes longer and is more expensive as well. So last year we had a federal fund exchange request at 75% on the dollar. So it was considerably less than the 90% on the dollar they're offering this year. And we felt like 75% was still a good deal for us, but it wasn't near as good a deal as 90%. So we kind of looked at the different projects we've had over the years last year. So just for example, North Broadway corridor, it was done in the mid-2000s. The construction cost was $2.2 million. The construction engineering was $437,000, and the design engineering was $308,000. So really the design and the construction engineering were almost 34% of that project, of the construction cost of that project. So it's a big project, and it's something that was a good project for Salina, but it cost us quite a bit to engineer and design it, and then the inspection wise. So that was maybe an extreme example, but a couple other projects, Broadway Hageman intersection was done in the late or mid 2000s as well. Construction cost was $374,000. The construction engineering and design were around $100,000, so 27% basically. So no matter how we sliced it, we were still in the mid 20s, low 30s. If we got a really good project, we were at 22.5 on South Ohio, but that was a pretty easy project, and so we were almost at the 75% or better before. So it's like a 90% is a no-brainer, and KDOT would even tell you in their presentation that they made to the commission it was maybe last year or the year before, when they were trying to convince cities that it was a good deal to go to 75%. Most cities weren't buying it, but they were trying to convince us. Just a normal project bid, KDOT project total, if you bid it in a local project, it's $525,000 versus if you bid it more as a local project, it's $423,000. So it's about an 80%. They see an 80% increase. Why is that? Well, it's just all the different specifications and Buy America provisions, which some of those provisions are good provisions, but they are expensive. Davis-Bacon wage requirements, disadvantaged business enterprise requirements. So a contractor who bids a KDOT job just has to add in more costs for those projects, and that's just what it costs to do business. So what KDOT does is they give some of those dollars back to the cities and take 10% of it, and then they use those dollars for their bigger projects if they have to do all those normal requirements anyway, and allow us a lot more flexibility with our projects, which means we can use them for mill and overlays, curb repairs on just normal streets. So in this case, it's Ninth Street. We feel like the Ninth Street corridor looks a lot better than, out there, and it's getting better each time. And so that's because we can use these funds to do just more things than just KDOT would allow us to do. With curb repair, mill and overlays, microsurfacings. I mean, you can use it for about anything, really, that's construction related, but we try to use it on a kind of a major improvement program for us. But that project wouldn't be eligible because it's not a major modification or a major rehab like the South Ohio widening was, or North Ohio Bridge, or those kind of, that's the normal federal aid process. So it just allows the city a lot more flexibility. So we feel like this is a good thing that we get these funds, and we have programmed them annually, used them annually on a lot of different projects, as you can see. Looking at the last few years, we've used it for, let's see, what do we have in here? Yeah, East Magnolia, Iron Avenue, Centennial Road, Country Club Road, and last year's Ninth Street Curb and Gutter project. So basically, this request is to exchange $543,000 for $488,000 of state funds and use those on the Ninth Street project for this year. And then next year, we'll hopefully be asked the same question again and get the same, hopefully about the same amount. We've been averaging about $480,000 to $490,000 a year for this program. So I would stand for questions.
So we've been doing the fund exchange since about 2016?
2010.
Oh, 2010, so,
Yeah.
okay.
Yep.
So, all right,
Yep.
okay. And
Yeah,
then-
last year was kind of an anomaly, and were you all on the commission last year? I believe all of you were. So we went through this last year, and it was a longer discussion because it was at 75%. So
Right.
it was a harder discussion last year. So I feel like this year it's not as hard, but it's still, yeah, we're giving up some money, that's for sure.
And you went through some of the restrictions and the specifications that make it, that bump the prices up for us, besides the engineering, and I think I wrote down also Buy American, but I don't know what other provisions that, I just wondered if you could touch on those really quickly, like what are some of those cost drivers that drive the cost up if we align ourselves with the KDOT requirements?
Yeah, the Buy America, Davis-Bacon wage rates.
You might elaborate on that.
Man, I don't,
But
those are just a certain
Davis-Bacon
amount of
requires
rates.
that prevailing wage rates for the county or the region be paid by the contractor to all their employees and by the subs to all their employees. So it's not necessarily a greater rate. Quite a few times it is. It just depends on the job category and the prevailing wage rates in your county. But it's intended to set a minimum wage rate to be paid on the job, regardless of what might be the normal wage rate that contractor pays to their employees otherwise.
What I know also about that is the contractor has to have a Davis-Bacon wage rate person on the job, because he has to go around do interviews, and you have to make sure people are getting paid this, and it's a constant, a lot of paperwork. There's a lot of paperwork involved with making sure for a year or two long project. It's a quite a bit of extra paperwork than just giving them the check. Disadvantaged business enterprise, KDOT has a policy where they have to set a percentage of the project that has to go to a disadvantaged business enterprise. So that has some value, but it's also a forced thing, and so it typically drives the cost up, because they know that if they're the only disadvantaged business enterprise in town, then they can charge a little more for it. So that is a concern that's been a problem for state projects as well, or for federal aid projects as well.
I'm sorry, you said the state has that, or that, I understand it's the federal.
Federal aid does, yes.
But the
federal
state
aid.
does not require, or
Must
may
not,
not
not
get a
with-
question.
It comes with the federal funds being passed through
Right.
through the state, so it does apply to these type of projects.
On the
that's where
federal
I was
aid
getting
project.
confused.
This starts out as federal money that's then allocated to the state, and then the state further allocates it.
For
so-
lack of a better term, I'll call it a minority set-aside or disadvantaged set-aside. So even though it starts out federal money, it becomes state, does that requirement still attach to it once it becomes KDOT money? That we're actually trading for and
The
spending?
trading for, no, it does not. The money, dollars we're getting is not a requirement. So if we,
If it were through the state program rather than this funds exchange, it would still apply. And a lot of times it's referred to as DBE and MBE, disadvantaged business and minority business.
the exchange funds do not come with those kind of strings attached or those kind of requirements.
Do we have businesses in Salina that are losing the opportunity to apply? I mean,
Don't know of
assuming
any.
their bids within reason, but do we have any in Salina that historically tried to get bids in and have not necessarily, you'd have to make a judgment call as to whether or not it's because of the lack of requirement otherwise, but
Right.
I just
They-
don't know.
They still would have the opportunity
Yeah.
to bid, so it doesn't preclude them. But if the DBE requirement's in place, it allocates a percentage of the job that has to be awarded to a qualifying business. So it,
Even if they're not the low bid.
Correct.
Right.
Correct. So
That's,
comes into play.
that's where it comes into play, and we just don't, we haven't had a real federal aid project for quite a while, so we haven't really seen who those contractors are. They're not local that I can remember, but, I mean, I say that now, and somebody might come to the commission and say, I'm a local person next week. I'm not sure about that, but we haven't seen that
those
for
would
quite
have
a
to be
while.
local contractors.
They don't have to be, it's just, we don't know of any local people who are not, who are not, that are DBs that are not getting a lot of work, or, because of this project, or because of the requirements not being there. We haven't heard of that
So
anyway.
if you had a project and no DBs bid on it, you'd have to go out and find some to meet
Correct.
the requirement of
Yes.
of using the federal funds.
Yep.
Are there any in Saline County? Maybe I should just ask that question.
I don't know.
yeah.
I don't know.
I know I don't know, so if anyone in the audience
I
who does that
don't-
type of work knows.
I personally don't know as it relates to Saline County. I can tell you, just in my general experience, there are quite a few companies that I've dealt with in other locations where the ownership is strategically set up to qualify as a DBE or an MBE. So while it may not seem self-evident that the company qualifies, quite a few of them have
That's true. They may.
set themselves up so they can.
We know of a DB design firm that's in Salina, so we know of a design consulting firm that is here. I'm not sure about contractors.
Okay. You had some more.
I'm done. No. I think it's an interesting conversation, to have, to talk about, what requirements that the federal government would put on, us in exchange for that $54,000. And maybe that's, I think it's a conversation to have about whether or not we support those initiatives and whether we think that would be a good potential use of, $54,000. So,
Well, I was thinking the same way. And the other question which I would have to ask first would be, is there any major difference in safety or functionality if you follow the federal or the state designing guidelines?
That's kind of why we're using them on, just maintenance projects that are, we're not changing, and widening Ninth Street or anything. We're just replacing what's there. So yeah, typically we try to use these dollars for rehabbing old streets to a certain extent. So if we end up going to a widening project or a bridge project, the last federal aid project was Greeley Bridge. So that was a federal aid project that that's our most recent one, I guess I'd say. So a lot of times those are major modifications that you can use federal aid dollars for, and we feel like those are good use of the funds. They are higher testing and higher inspection and higher oversight by the state. So we feel like sometimes we need that and sometimes we don't.
I guess just from the perspective of an ignorant consumer driving his car over one of those bridges, I want it to be designed to the
Right.
highest standard. But
Yeah,
no matter whose it is.
I say that because we're going to bring you another bridge project for next year, but it's not going to be a federal aid job, but we're going to have to prove to you it was designed by Wilson & Company. It's a good bridge. It's like the other bridge that's there. It's just, we didn't have, you kind of have to figure out which federal aid dollars you want to use, and we feel like the most bang for our buck is this exchange program right now, unless we had a large project which warranted the higher, a lot more design. I can tell you, the Ninth Street project, we've designed in-house twice, so that's our second year in a row, and that saves us 50 grand a pop, I'm sure. So we feel like we are as efficient with those dollars as we can, but it's not always the right thing to, or there's other projects where it would warrant, we need to get an outside firm for help. We're not the experts, so we need a lot more design.
I guess my question was similar to Commissioner Hodges, just from a philosophical point of view. You don't feel like you have to answer it, but is giving up what we're giving up in these 3 or 4 conditions, does it cost more than $54,000? I mean, to not support those initiatives. It sounds like the only one which would be an initiative here would be the wage. Well, the wage and right, and for our workers' perspective, I would imagine they'd be interested in the difference in the wage. Are we talking $1 or $2 an hour, or several dollars an hour?
Well, just to clarify, it wouldn't apply to city workers. It would apply to the employees of contractors.
Right.
And so to really know that answer, it would take a comparison of the rates they currently pay to the applicable prevailing wage rates, which are by job classification. And so, in part, Dan mentioned you essentially need an auditor that is tracking all that to really be able to answer that question, make sure the wage rates are appropriate.
Historically, if you just had to guess, are they kind of close, or
In my experience,
not so
it's a
close?
pretty sizable premium. A lot of municipalities work pretty hard to avoid Davis-Bacon, or at least give it consideration as they look at a project. I can't remember the name of the loan program that came out right around the 2008 recession, but they made low-interest loans available, and we, as the city of Salina, looked at that pretty strategically in terms of the interest rate savings and the Davis-Bacon wage costs, and concluded that the wages the expense outweighed the savings that was offered by the program, so we chose not to use it at that time.
Okay.
I'm good.
You good? Okay.
Any other questions?
Thanks for withstanding
Thank
the
you.
rhetorical
No
question
problem.
barrage.
Thank you.
Any questions or comments from anyone in the audience? All right, bring it back to the commission for action.
Mr. Mayor, I move we authorize the city manager to sign the request to exchange 2019 federal funds for the 9th Street Curb and Gutter Improvements City Project Number 90001.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to sign a request from Kansas Department of Transportation to exchange 2019 federal funds for the 9th Street Curb and Gutter Improvement City Project 90001. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Just as an aside, would it be possible to just sort of canvass our area just to see who is classified as a...
If there's a
just-
state directory of sorts, I think we might be able to get
I
that
don't know how
information for you.
it's even listed.
Yep. Well, we'll see what we can find. Dan will see what he can find.
Thank you. All right, 7.4.
Item 7.4, Markley Road Special Assessment Follow-Up Discussion.
Thank you, Mayor and Commissioners. I'm going to apologize in advance for my coughing and sniffling. I've come down with the summer cold, and today's day 1. So you may have seen that Gina Rekoff has joined me
Lucky
here
Gina.
in place of City Legal Counsel Greg Banks. And Gina is with Gilmore and Bell and is our bond counsel. When we refer to bond counsel, she's who I picture in my head because she's who we talk to 90% of the time as it relates to special assessments and bond issues. And so she's been very involved in all the work leading up to trying to bring these decision points to you. So the other thing I would tell you is, admittedly, my staff report is kind of going back to basics a little bit and going into greater detail, in part because I've been getting questions and feedback about why is it that we need to take this approach for Markley Road in particular. In the past, the city's paid for roads without trying to allocate any cost to adjoining development. So wanted to give you kind of that history as well. So with that, I'll go ahead and dive in. But as you well know, Salina has a long history of financing infrastructure improvements with special assessment financing, and historically that's been focused on what I would call internal improvements, meaning the water, sewer, street, and storm sewers within the subdivision, not necessarily anything adjoining or outside the subdivision. And on a few occasions, there's been examples of the developer privately financing the improvements rather than using special assessment financing, but that's certainly the exception. I think we could count those examples on one hand. There are also instances as it relates to infrastructure that serves a subdivision maybe on its edge or outside of the subdivision where infrastructure was already in place and the development was able to take advantage of that, whether that's water mains, sewer mains, or street improvements. So, and then lastly, we also have examples where we as a city have invested in improvements proactively and then set up cost recovery ordinances with the intention of setting a fee structure and kind of setting an interest rate calculation so that we know it's going to be used somewhere out in the future, and when a property benefits from that improvement, then the cost recovery fees apply. You may recall the Yost Drive project, the location for the police training facility was subject to cost recovery for water, sewer, storm, and street. And so that those improvements were put in the Yost edition years ago and were taken advantage of by some property owners pretty early in the process, but all those vacant properties will get a cost recovery bill at the point that they purchase or they change hands and want to develop. So in the staff report, we provided a list of 9 examples of cost recovery projects that are currently active by our records. That may not be an all-inclusive list, but it demonstrates that we have a history of another mechanism, and cost recovery will come into this conversation before it's all over. So there's a recognition that the residential developments impact our system and our expenses beyond just the interior improvements, and that conversation started to take place in 2016. And so what came out of that conversation was a policy change directed at what we've defined as perimeter streets. And so that policy change is pretty significant in terms of what we've seen in the past and what might have been the old normal and what we're trying to administer as, I guess, what you would call the new normal. So Ordinance 1610-835 was passed in May of 2016. It amended our subdivision regulations, our general street requirements, and street design standards, specifically pertaining to perimeter streets. And so in the staff report, I tried to parse out the ordinance in a logical way to kind of walk you through it. And so it starts out that the perimeter street policy provides that no subdivision shall be improved unless all direct access perimeter streets and connecting streets meet or exceed the applicable public street standard at the time of application for approval. And so there's 2 defined terms in there. Direct access perimeter street is a segment of a perimeter street abutting a subdivision from which a required means of direct street access is determined to be required. So if you think of a subdivision that's being platted and it needs to connect to a street that abuts it for its entrance point for the subdivision, that street that it's connecting to would meet the definition of a direct access perimeter street. And so this says that it starts with the presumption that direct access perimeter street needs to meet the city's street standards. It goes on to say that connecting streets must also meet that standard. And connecting streets are defined as the street segment that connects the perimeter street upon which there's direct street access to the improved collector or arterial nearest that direct access street. So if you think of subdivision entrance going out onto the perimeter street, then that perimeter street needs to connect to a connecting street. Specifically, as we talked about Magnolia Hills, that would make the road segment that immediately joins Magnolia Hills and Wheatland Valley the perimeter street, and then the segment beyond those boundaries that gets back to Magnolia as the connecting street. And so it goes on to say that no subdivision shall be approved unless all direct access perimeter streets and connecting streets meet the applicable standard, or will be improved to the applicable public street standard as part of development of the subdivision. So trying to contemplate that while it may not meet the standard at the time, it can be improved to meet that standard. And then jumping ahead a little bit, the language goes on to say, provided, however, that a subdivision plat may be approved if all direct access perimeter streets and connecting streets are or will be improved to an alternate street standard, not less than the interim street standard. So now we have some additional language that provides for an interim street standard that is sufficient in the short run. And that's a defined term as well. An interim street standard meets either new or existing street improvements as determined by the city engineer, and there are criteria that are applied in the ordinance. So as it relates to existing street improvements, it specifies a concrete or asphalt paved surface at 24 feet in width, and a threshold thickness of 8 inches of asphalt or 6 inches of concrete, a projected useful life of 30 years, fully functional ditches or curb and gutter, and concrete sidewalk at least 5 feet in width on at least one side of the street. So again, as it relates to Markley, staff has looked at Markley and identified the sidewalk as the one thing that's lacking to meet the interim street standard. So then the ordinance goes on to say that interim approach can be considered pursuant to the terms of a development agreement entered into between the city and the developer. And I apologize for reading to you, but this is very technical and it's kind of what's driving all this conversation. So it goes on to say, if any segment of a direct access perimeter street or connecting street does not meet the applicable public street standard, the developer may request that the matter be referred to the governing body to consider a development agreement entirely at the discretion of the governing body between the city and the developer addressing such matters, including but not limited to timing, financial terms and standards, potential utilization of recorded consents to special assessments, the extent and nature of the appropriate street improvements, the nature and pace of the development, current and anticipated traffic volumes, current cost savings that may result by allowing current streets improvements to an interim street standard, and the extent to which any public interests are served by the street improvements. So that kind of lays out the scenario by which the developer can request that a development agreement be drafted and entered into to get to the interim street standard. So as you know, a plat has been submitted for Magnolia Hills Phase 2 in Wheatland Valley. Magnolia Hills proposes approximately 130 residential lots, and Wheatland Valley proposes approximately 228 residential lots. Both of those plats extend from Markley Road on the west to Holmes Road on the east. So to complicate things further, we now have two perimeter roads in question, and we have some of that property in the city limits and some of it out of the city limits. So neither Markley or Holmes currently meet the applicable interim or full street standard. Markley's very close to the interim standard, but doesn't meet the full street standard, and Holmes is gravel and doesn't meet the interim standard. We identified that it kind of made a logical break point to find the midpoint between Markley and Holmes, and recognizing that the portion on the west side of that line is oriented to Markley and the portion on the east side is oriented to Holmes. And that's the order of development of those proposed plats. So they would kind of work themselves west to east. And additionally, as needed, we have past examples where emergency access for fire and police are provided, and it's a controlled access point. So if there was need for emergency access off of Holmes, that could be provided for in advance of fully improving Holmes. So then again, I mentioned that after we received those plats, staff started trying to work this through and create a development agreement that took into account what the perimeter street policy was trying to accomplish. And it turned out to be much more challenging than I might have expected. And not to give you excuses necessarily, but we did provide you a list of some of the things that came into play. And so there's statutory provisions that generally relate to special assessments. Gina keeps educating me on additional nuances as this project twists and turns. And there's Attorney General opinions and case law. There's statute and case law related to imposition of what I call impact fees that kind of limit our options to try to recover some of these costs in a different way. There's recent case law related to what's been referred to as a driveway tax in Merriam. They attempted to impose a fee per dwelling unit, more for just ongoing maintenance than road improvements, and that was taken all the way to the Supreme Court. This whole project has a lot of uniqueness to it in that we've got properties in and out of the city limits, we've got platted and unplatted properties, we have significant portions of it that are already platted and developed and occupied. The ownership of the subdivisions that have made application to us don't represent 50% of the property ownership. If that were the case, it'd be a heck of a lot easier to form a benefit district, and we would have had this done a long time ago. There's an inability to form one all-encompassing benefit district, but for that reason, we just don't have the critical mass to form that benefit district. And then I thought I was well-versed in the options of special assessment financing, and Gina has introduced a new section number 12684C, which is another approach that we're having to implement as part of this. So I can go on, but it has been incredibly complicated. So I tried to boil it down, and we've had quite a bit of conversation. I think we have a plan that's coalescing, and the most preliminary step is to identify the benefit area boundaries. Regardless of the ability to form a special assessment district, we need to identify what it shapes up as a logical and defensible benefit area as it relates to the proposed road improvement. This is where I discussed the midpoint between Markley and Holmes and kind of dividing it east and west, and they acknowledge that our primary focus at the moment, based on your last conversation on this topic, is Markley Road, since there's not only traffic from the proposed developments, but there's pass-through traffic today, and it serves as a collector street in our system. So we've narrowed the consideration to two possible configurations. We provided you maps of each. We're referring to one as the Markley Road benefit area, and the second one is the expanded Markley Road benefit area. And we struggled to kind of put those boundaries together in the first place, and I guess your conversation then kind of went in the same direction that we were going, in that, well, is it this smaller area or is it a larger area? And Commissioner Hodges suggested a possible larger expanded area, and we took that into account. And the point was that Cedar Ridge Drive connects to Markley, and so if you improve Markley, do some of those properties that adjoin Cedar Ridge Drive benefit. We modified Commissioner Hodges' district to account for both sides of Cedar Ridge Drive and to account for a river run that also connects to Cedar Ridge Drive, and ultimately had conversation with Gina about how do we draw this boundary, and the map that you have in front of you for that expanded area is essentially Cedar Ridge Drive to Crawford, and that midpoint between those two, either going south to Markley or north to Crawford. So by the time you added in both sides of Cedar Ridge Drive, and by the time you found that midpoint and added that in, it got considerably larger than what Commissioner Hodges had initially proposed. But in speaking with Gina, that's if we're going to go that route, that's probably the most defensible way to configure that benefit area. So I think we're certainly open to alternate configurations and open to a modification of those district boundaries. In fact, I'll touch on one point here in a little bit, but we've tried to kind of narrow it down to two theories or two approaches, for lack of a better description, that we felt like possibly made the most sense. We previously had conversation that Bond Council has advised that you as the governing body have discretion for allocation of special assessments based on kind of the benefit to the city at large. So that kind of takes us into the next kind of decision point, and we've discussed that previously, that we could allocate that because it's a collector street or an arterial, that the community at large benefits X percent from the improvements, or they impose traffic and loading at some percentage. So on the assumption that you identified a benefit boundary, and then your next decision point is some allocation between city at large and the benefit district, that then, whatever's allocated to the benefit district is what we start doing the math on in terms of allocating that portion across the benefit district. So there's two opportunities that the city would still be involved in that benefit district. One is we own property in the district, and we do own parkland in the area. So if there's parkland in the area, when we start allocating the portion that's allocated to the benefit district, that could represent additional expense for the city. And then additionally, if there's a developed property already that isn't needing replatting, that Gina may have a different term for it, but that is kind of city at large as well. We don't have the opportunity to assess those individual properties that have been platted and occupied and don't have any agreement in place in advance. So regardless, this location or otherwise, when that is the case, we just have to factor that in as costs that the city needs to carry. So those are two instances where, in addition to that initial allocation that you make, there may be some additional cost allocated to the city. And then I would also tell you that just because it's allocated to the development, it doesn't become due and payable until they develop. And so if there's undeveloped property in the district, we potentially would carry that debt and make the debt payments on that debt schedule until they benefited in some way and we had an opportunity to recover those costs, or if the use never changed, then theoretically the city would have paid that off and not gotten paid back. So the Markley Road benefit area, the smaller area, does not contain parkland, but it does adjoin East Crawford Rec area on the north. But it does contain developed properties that would not be subject to future specials, so that'd be a cost that we would carry as well. The expanded Markley Road benefit area includes a substantial amount of city parkland. In fact, the vast majority of that remaining section of Markley to the north, we have parkland on both sides of it, with the golf course being on one side and East Crawford Recreation Area being on the other side. And so as we looked at it and thought about it, we feel that smaller benefit area is probably the most appropriate for a handful of reasons. First of all, that benefit area is based on the direct access perimeter road segment that started this whole conversation in the first place, in terms of we have plats for that, and that's the road section that's required to be improved in order to meet our codes. As I mentioned, the vast majority of the additional portion of Markley is bounded on both sides by city park property. We really struggled to come up with some methodology to come up with that expanded benefit area, but it's not a very solid methodology in terms of where do those boundaries end. You could keep extending them. And I would mention, too, that the numbers that we've provided are the costs associated with that smaller road segment. If we go to the expanded area, then the road cost would have to pick up more of the Markley Road segment to correspond to Cedar Ridge Drive. And then the expanded benefit area includes what would be perimeter street segments beyond just Magnolia Hills and Wheatland Valley at that point. And then application of an approach that includes secondary benefit just kind of creates possibly a perpetually expanding area as you try to figure out where the traffic's coming from. So as I mentioned, the two key decision points that if you as a governing body could give staff direction on, then I think we can prepare a development agreement, bring it back to you for your consideration, are the benefit district boundaries and the preliminary cost allocations between city at large and the benefit district. And with respect to the preliminary cost allocation, we had conversation at the last meeting about how to determine that number, and staff offered up some traffic count information as the best means that we knew to objectively try to come up with a number. And so the math we provided previously was that KDOT reports 4,620 trips per day on the Markley Road section. The ITE, or Institute of Traffic Engineers, traffic manual provides ranges of traffic counts for different uses, including residential uses, and in the middle of their range for residential is 10 trips per day, and there's 129 developed properties in the area today. So if you take the 10 trips a day times 129 properties, that's 1,290 trips generated by residents of the benefit district, compared to the 4,620 total trips that are seen by KDOT. So that creates kind of a 70-30 split, 27.9% local and 72.1% passing through or city at large. Part of your conversation was concerned about whether that number was accurate and whether we had another way to verify that number. So actually, staff did do a traffic count recently, but there was some difficulties with those numbers, and so we weren't entirely confident. But we went back and found a traffic count that had previously been done at the entrances of Magnolia Hills, and we were able to identify, I'm sorry, let me back up. The KDOT traffic count it was taken in the summer of 2017. It is Tuesdays through Thursdays, so trying to avoid or intentionally not include what might be high traffic times in terms of weekends and things like that. And it's an average for a 24-hour period. And in 2017, that's a couple years ago now in terms of the number of developed properties. And then the local traffic estimate is just based on that ITE multiplier in that first scenario that we provided. As I was mentioning, Public Works was able to find a traffic study that was done in 2016 for the entrances of Magnolia Hills, and that was over a 24-hour period, a weekday, and it reported 1,059 trips. So we were able to go back and look at building permits and certificates of occupancies and try to sync up the number of residences that were in Magnolia Hills in 2016 when that traffic study was conducted, and we determined that there were 78 homes in the subdivision at that time. So if you do that math, that turns out to about 13 and a half trips per day. So we're still kind of in that 10 to 12, 13 range. If you applied those numbers, then instead of 70-30, the ratio is more like 60-40, 60% city large, 40% within the development. So Gina's here, and we've got some additional information that we need to share with you. But in terms of conformance with the strategic plan, we're trying to be exciting economically, socially, and trying to provide high-quality services with our limited resources and provide mixed-use quality development and redevelopment. And admittedly, this is a pretty homogeneous single-family housing, but it is something that we don't have a lot of lots left in the market, and there's an identified need for. And then our strategic plan says it will maintain growth and development policies that are updated to reflect current conditions and desired growth direction. And I would tell you that this whole perimeter street approach is intended to create a system where development pays for itself, or at least is proportionally responsible for its impact on our system beyond just the interior road improvements. So Jacob, if you could pop the maps up on the screen. There's a couple more things I want to touch on, and then I'll stand for questions, or we can start to have the conversation. That one is what we're calling the Markley Road benefit area. And so it's a combination of that midpoint between Markley and Holmes as the eastern boundary, with the exception of the church being carved out since it has access on Magnolia. And then we kind of, if you start in the north and head west, we follow some topography through Great Life. That awkward area right there falls towards Markley, and most likely would develop towards Markley if Great Life was ever redeveloped. And then we tried to look at the configuration of entrance points and driveways on those properties immediately to the south, and they have a drive that extends from the area that you see in green there all the way back to Markley. Same way to those properties to the south. And then the remaining areas that are not currently included in the district all have their access points off of Magnolia today. And so Gina asked the question, and understandably so, why it is that the east side of Markley is in the benefit district and the west side there on that south end is out. And the reason being that it's currently developed with an access point on Magnolia, but that easily could be included in the district if we so desired. Jacob, if you could go to the other map. So then this is the extended boundary area. It's essentially that same district, but then Cedar Ridge Drive and that midpoint that I described. If you see Marymount Road, there's a line there kind of between the U and the N, I believe. That is the midpoint between the curve in Cedar Ridge Drive and Crawford. So the assumption was everything south, and obviously it depends on traffic patterns of individuals, but the assumption was the south half was oriented towards Cedar Ridge Drive and Markley, and the north half was oriented to Crawford Street. And that's not a straight line across the north, just because there is a subdivision in there with one entrance point out of the subdivision that's north of the line, even though the subdivision dips a little bit south of the line. So that's the expanded benefit area. And as I mentioned before, if we truly were going to pursue that expanded area, we would need to revisit the extent of the road improvements, and we're really starting to get past the perimeter streets that are at issue as it relates to our perimeter street ordinance and our plating. And then lastly, there's a whole nother level of complexity that I'm going to turn to Gina to address for you. But this whole model assumes that we have the developers of Magnolia Hills and Wheatland Valley execute and submit petitions at the outset, and they acknowledge to an agreed upon arrangement of cost of special assessment in advance by way of 126A4C. And then there's some duration of time before Markley Road actually has to be improved. And so the remaining undeveloped area, we would potentially have the opportunity to enter into more 126A4C petitions as those areas develop. But that really becomes a timing question in terms of when the road's going to be improved. In fact, there might be reason for us to be motivated to put off that improvement to try to wait until we have more critical mass of additional petitions. Having said that, at the point that the road is improved, then our opportunity for special assessment financing it goes away, and we would then have to turn to cost recovery as a means to recover that remaining cost. Our current approach to cost recovery is lump sum payment right up front, and we don't do payment plans because we don't have the ability to make that a lien on the property. So, there comes with that a little bit of sticker shock when instead of being able to pay it off over 15 years, the property owner needs to pay it in one lump sum at the outset. And then the really complicated part I'm going to let Gina talk about is depending on how far we get into the process of establishing the benefit district, that kind of perfects our standing in terms of being able to be challenged. So the premise is that, in advance of the improvements, each property that's benefiting will execute the petition, but we won't know the final cost and if there's going to be a time delay. And so I'll let her speak to about 3 or 4 different scenarios that we could approach how we account for those costs. And I'll let her correct anything I just got done saying that wasn't correct.
That was all perfect. And I'll talk a little bit about sort of the process. So I think most of you are familiar with benefit districts, that you'll have a developer come and submit a petition to the city commission requesting to create a benefit district and levy special assessments within a defined area. And this 126A04C process that Mike just talked about is exactly that. Like you're used to seeing, you'd be presented with that petition and you would have the ability to either approve that or reject it at your sole discretion. Once you decided that, if you decided that you wanted to accept that petition, then you would adopt a resolution that would create the district. That resolution creating the district outlines the property that would be liable for the special assessments, the maximum amount of cost that they would be liable to pay through special assessments, and how those special assessments would be divvied up among individual lots within that area. That resolution then would be approved by the commission, published in the paper, and it would be recorded in the real estate records. So anyone who bought a lot subsequently from the developer would have notice in their real estate records and in their title work when they purchased the property that there was a benefit district on the property. So that's sort of step 1 in the benefit district process. Step 2 in the benefit district process is the process of actually levying the special assessments against the property and setting the maximum amount that the property is going to pay. There are 2 different ways that you can go about that. So, you have step one in the process that I just described. And then you can either choose to proceed with step two in the process and actually levy the special assessments before you ever begin construction of the improvement, or you can make the improvements, figure out what the final costs are, and then at that time levy the special assessments and go through the notice and the hearing and the protest period that happens during that special assessment process. So I would say what the city of Salina has typically done, and I can't tell you that this has happened every single time, but I could say the vast majority of what the city has done in my 15-year career of working with the city is gone through step one, completed the improvements, and then once we determine what those total final costs of the project are, then we give notice of a public hearing. We send letters to property owners letting them know what those final costs are and what their allocable share per lot is. We conduct a public hearing here in the commission chambers, and then the commission adopts an ordinance that formally levies those special assessments against those properties. At that point, property owners have a 30-day period after publication of that ordinance during which they could file suit to challenge the special assessments. During that process, technically under the statute, the only way that a property owner could challenge the special assessments is to say that you did your math wrong, essentially, that you did not accurately capture the total final costs of the project, or you did not properly allocate those costs to each of the lots in the district. And so then they could file suit and challenge that process and ask the court to review your math, essentially. It doesn't mean that a plaintiff might not bring other claims during that process, but there is a 30-day period and then the statute of limitations runs. That is the typical process, so I'll call that step 2A. Alternatively, the statute provides a process where you can levy what are called pre-construction assessments, so I'll refer to this as step 2B. Okay, so under step 2B, what we do is we will have set the total maximum cost of the project. So this means that we wouldn't have an inflationary factor. We wouldn't say that the costs of the project are X dollars plus 1% per month or 5% per year or whatever you would choose. We would pick an actual number that was the maximum cost that would be assessed, and we would go through that notice and that public hearing process up front before the improvements were done. We would have the assessment ordinance approved at that time, and that 30-day non-litigation period essentially would run. Your statute of limitations would run at that point. Probably also record that ordinance of record in the real estate records, so that a property owner could look at that ordinance and say the maximum amount that I will ever pay is X dollars, as shown in the exhibit to the ordinance. And then we would go and do the improvements, and then if the actual costs were under that amount, then we would only levy the actual cost of the improvement, not the maximum amount. The disadvantage of doing that pre-construction assessment process is that you can't have that inflationary factor, which in a project like this comes into play because we don't know how long it's going to take before this project is going to happen. It might be 5 years, it might be 15 years. And as you can imagine, the amount of inflation in that extra 10 years could be substantial. And so we would be locking ourselves in, the city would be locking itself in at that maximum dollar amount if you went with option 2B. However, the advantage of option 2B is that you have gotten that whole process out of the way. You're assured of your rights to be able to levy special assessments up to that maximum dollar amount, and the statute of limitations would have run at that point. So it really is a trade-off and a policy decision for the governing body as to, whether you would prefer to have that step and that process out of the way, give up your right to inflation in the 2B pre-construction assessment process, or whether you'd like to maintain the ability to capture the possible inflationary costs and do your notice and public hearing, and maybe have a little less certainty related to those special assessments and sort of the timing of all of that if you waited to levy the special assessments until after the project was complete. None of that, the special assessment process and that second phase, is changed at all by sort of the first two decision items that were outlined, which is what is the area that benefits and what is the allocation to the city at large. What I just described, I'd say we should probably put down as sort of a third decision point about the process that would be employed to implement your other policy decisions.
If I could make two clarifications, and correct me if I'm wrong. The scenario where you do the pre-construction assessments could be an inflated number above and beyond the numbers that we anticipate today. Then it just wouldn't be a inflationary factor that's applied annually or in some time increment, but it could just be a larger number to give ourselves some room.
Yes, that's correct. You could choose to have the amount of the total cost of the improvement instead of about $5.5 million today. We could say we think that it will be at least this many years, and so we would like to move forward with a maximum cost of $7 million, or pick a number in excess of that 5.5.
And then if we went the other approach where we allowed for the inflation factor, and the opportunity to challenge that is purely based on the math and not on...
That's correct, although I would say that, when that happens, you usually see a lot of other questions come up, particularly if it has been a long period of time between when the district is created and when the assessments are levied. Because typically you have a lot of turnover, or you can have a lot of turnover in property owners, and they may not recall that their predecessor in interest, the developer or whomever, petitioned and went through that process with the commission some years earlier.
So I've got one last thing, and then I'll be happy to try to answer any questions or let you discuss. So as part of the staff report, we provided you, I'm not even sure how many different scenarios, but 60-40, and the first number being the city share, and the second number being the development or the benefit district share. So there's scenarios for 60-40, 70-30, 75-25, 80-20, 90-10, and 95-5. And then we do have a dynamic spreadsheet that we can go in and plug any other percentages you might wish to discuss. But that's that first decision point that we talked about. And then the spreadsheet carries out the math for allocating that benefit district portion to the properties within either the Markley Road benefit area or the expanded Markley Road benefit area, and then calculates the estimated annual special assessments for individual lots for lots that would be developed in the future. And all these numbers are based on our best estimates of today's number. They're not inflated over any block of time. So this would be, the assumption or the hypothetical scenario that we do it in the next 12 months or so. Everything Gina mentioned factors into how we want to approach it going forward. But with that, be happy to try to answer any questions.
Well, I think I heard you wrong, but I thought I heard you say bond counsel said that the expanded version was more defensible. That was...
No, I'll let her.
Did I hear that wrong?
Whenever we create and we look at a map to try and figure out benefit areas, at the end of the day, it is a policy decision, but definitely facts and circumstances, right? And so when we look at any map to determine a benefit district area, we always have lots and lots of discussions, and there are a handful of people in this room that I spend a fair bit of time on the phone with on a regular basis talking about, well, what's the map going to look like, and why is this area in and this area is out? And I spend a lot of time playing devil's advocate to see what the answers I get back are about, well, why is this area benefited? And at the end of the day, it really is a factual determination about, whether a particular area is benefited. And one of the things we talk a lot about is that it is whether that area is benefited for any purpose. It is not the use that the property, that is being made of the property right now, because, tomorrow a tornado could come and, wipe out whatever use is being made of the property currently. Or the property could just be redeveloped for another purpose. And so we really try and look at the topography of the land, the access points for all of the various streets, and usually at the boundaries, we spend an awful lot of time talking about, is this property benefited in the same way that the adjacent property is benefited? And so if you look at, the expanded area, particularly where we're talking about the improvements really being that black and gold line or black and gold hash portion of Markley, are those properties to the north of that improvement really benefited by that improvement of that segment of Markley in the same way that the properties that are on either side of it benefited? Certainly staff has made arguments both ways, and at the end of the day, the governing body gets to make this decision. And as long as it is not arbitrary and capricious, then that decision is upheld by courts, but it is really an effort to look at each of those individual properties and say, are those truly benefited and benefited in the same way as, some other parcel of property? If I had to pick between the two maps, I certainly see arguments why the property to the north is benefited, and we certainly have had all of those discussions and would not have presented that map to you if we didn't think that there was some benefit to those properties to the north. Are they benefited in the same way as the properties on either side of that single portion of Markley Road? I'm not sure. And I think that, there is an awful lot of data that has been compiled and presented to you. And I think at the end of the day, that's the decision that's before you about, really what does that benefit look like?
And the trigger for the improvements is the traffic count of what?
Yeah, that would go into the development agreement, but I believe what we've talked about is to go from interim to full is a traffic count of 6,500 cars a day.
I guess that's my question too. What decision we make or what we decide to do, nothing's going to take effect on any special assessments at all until Markley Markley meets the interim or full street standards. Right. So we could be looking at 10 years from now before anything happens, and we're not going to do anything until that.
With one clarification, there would need to be a sidewalk added to Markley to meet the interim standard, and the developers are aware of that. So we could make provision for that. They still have made application for special assessment for the improvements within the subdivision. So they're really waiting to satisfy the perimeter road requirements by way of a development agreement so that they can get started on their development and do special assessments internal to the subdivision. We can roll the sidewalk in to get Markley up to the interim street standard. And then, yes, you're correct. Anything beyond that, now's our opportunity to get the agreement in place, but the development thresholds are out in the future, some unspecified amount of time, depending on the rate of development.
So that goes back to what you were talking about property changing hands within that within that period of time. I mean, if I bought a house there at that time and was, and then maybe I sell it 5 years down the road, in the 6th year, they decided to do that development or do that road, I mean, the assessments, and then that's going to be on the other person.
Correct.
Yes.
This is an opportunity for us to get this agreement in place with the developers rather than after it's developed and we're trying to go to individual homeowners. But as a homeowner in one of these subdivisions, you would have special assessments for the internal improvements, and then it should be on record, and theoretically you should be aware that there's a potentially another round of special assessments when the threshold is met and the perimeter street is improved.
Yeah, so
Statute of limitations, though, if we don't do anything with this right now, that the special assessment part could run out, is that?
no, once you create a district and the resolution creating that district is recorded in the real estate records, and you've gone through the process of levying the special assessment, then that benefit district is valid. Your ability to levy special assessments in that maximum amount is valid. I think the times that something may come into play that would maybe foul up those plans would be if you decided to do some wildly different scope of improvements to Markley Road. Or that's about the only thing that I can envision. Obviously the actual total cost of the project might be well in excess of that maximum that you've set. And then it's really the city commission's decision at that point about whether they're comfortable moving forward with the project, knowing that the amount that the development is going to pay for is, really a much smaller percentage of the total overall cost. But that's, the sort of financing plan at the time the project is done. But there's nothing that would, say after 10 years, if you haven't constructed the project, then your ability to levy special assessments is null and void.
I think the 10-year scenario you might be thinking of is we've previously tried consensus specials where we've recorded that the developer has indicated the consent to a future special assessment district being formed, and that leaves us going back to the homeowner when the time comes to ask them to actually execute the petition to get started in the creation process. This gets it all formed on the front end. So I think bond counsel previously had expressed concern about consents to specials getting stale and having a shelf life.
These questions before us are at least about the areas that we're considering, the two boundary areas, seem unique to me enough that they shouldn't be a template for a future consideration. I mean, we already got half of the development on the east side of the road. You have the property in the county on the other side. A great deal's platted. But I would ask staff if this would be setting a precedent for the next thing we come to.
I think it could be a little bit. If we keep it limited to the direct access perimeter streets as defined by the ordinance, that's much cleaner in terms of the platting process and what's needed to satisfy the ordinance requirements and let a development go forward. If we extend it, if we extend it beyond that direct access perimeter street, we kind of have set a precedent that there's some secondary benefit area, but it gets real nebulous after that as to what that area is or how you define it. So from me as staff's perspective, I think that smaller area syncs up much more cleanly with our ordinance and what we're trying to accomplish, and as a precedent would be much easier to administer going forward.
Does the standard consider whether it's a collector or an arterial, or what type of artery it will eventually be to the city? How
yeah, there is some
significant
discussion
will it be?
about whether it's an impact street, whether it's a collector or arterial. So the width is pretty sufficient for, as an interim standard. It's when you start talking about turn lanes and things like that. But we've had some conversations that, and I don't know that an individual subdivision contributes to turn lanes. That might be a city-at-large design element as well. But there will be some uniqueness to the location and the street design, project by project.
And the piece you mentioned on Magnolia there at the bottom, as possibly in or out, how's Magnolia going to develop going to the east from the bridge there? I mean, where is there to?
Well, there's a lot of
That's it.
pre-existing development along that road segment. There'd be a little bit of property that could go through this exact same process, where Magnolia would be a direct access perimeter street, and they'd be subject to their proportional share of that improvement. So, assuming those properties come in and want to be platted and go through that process, we try to develop a development agreement that allocates costs, but admittedly, the vast majority of that would be city at large, given the way it's already developed.
If that corner section down there at Magnolia and Markley is not made part of the benefit district, would we allow them to have direct access onto Markley?
Well, that's a really good question.
Because
and
it's almost like if you're not going to participate, you don't get to participate, you know?
Well, it would turn on our ability to impose restricted access, and I'm sure Dean Andrew can answer this question better than I can. It's in the county at the moment, and so we don't have a lot of control, and by the time it comes to us, it's a little hard to speculate how it might have developed. But
Is there a reason we should not put that in there?
Boy, it could go either way. Like I said, the reason we left it out is it currently has a driveway access on Magnolia. So to put it in kind of presumes that we think we'll have the ability to require access off of Markley rather than its current access off of Magnolia.
Just a question, I don't know if it's...
I'm not sure there's a right answer to it.
Well, I apologize for introducing the whole.
Actually, you didn't. Staff was already starting to have a conversation about a broader area, but you definitely expanded it.
I'm totally offended you didn't accept my Cedar Ridge Drive boundary, but no, I guess I have a question too about on that undeveloped remainder that is to the west of Markley. You've got that square that kind of comes, you've got that portion that comes out. Is there a reason why we assign that to Markley, but then like Commissioner Hoppick was just saying, we don't capture that
Right.
absolutely adjacent piece?
Well, the key covers up a little bit of the aerial map underneath, but in the green shaded area, you may be able to see there's currently a drive coming off of Markley through the first property that adjoins Markley and into the second property, that second tier of green. And then there are entrance points on those other portions of the green. Everything that's out of that undeveloped remainder currently has access off of Magnolia. There's a long driveway run along the property along the river, and that notch that in the green boundary area is because that property also has access off of Magnolia. So you can kind of see, there's a drive entrance in that corner, and then there's a drive entrance right there. Then there's a big, long, rectangular property that is an access point, but the drive actually kind of cuts through it. But again, all that goes back to Magnolia.
Well, thanks for, taking a look and doing the extra exercise to present it to us. I do appreciate it. And, realizing that, what we're focused on at this point is the southern third or fourth of Markley Road. I guess I have a question for Ms. Rekoff. You mentioned like step 2A, that we wait until we've got the final construction costs, and then we do the assessments. That was the way that particular process goes, correct? How are property owners made aware that there's that expectation and that condition outstanding? I mean, I know you spoke to turnover, in property owners as people sell and move in, but is there a way to ensure that they understand that obligation is out there?
Yeah, absolutely. So, what we would do at this point is that the developer would submit a petition to create a district under 12-6A04C. We would bring that to the commission, and the commission would either approve or deny that at this point. And if you chose to approve it, it would be through adopting a resolution creating the district. Under state statute, that resolution would be both published in the newspaper, but more importantly, it would be recorded in the real estate records against every property. And in fact, there is a statute that requires the seller of any property where there are special assessments or a benefit district that has been created to disclose that to their buyer.
And then have we done any contemplation in terms of how this increased development is going to affect the northern part of Markley Road in terms of, and I'm not asking, excuse me, about specials in relation to this particular thing, but in particular segment of Markley, but as we move north, I mean, is that going to require us to upgrade that entire section of Markley? I mean, does it widen out enough that it's not going to provide us with some of the same challenges in terms of turn lanes and things?
When you say as we move north, in terms of development, or as you just talking about the northern road segment?
Just the road segment and increased traffic, because I mean, if all of a sudden we do another traffic study and, it's telling us that it's time to upgrade to a full city street standard as opposed to an interim street standard.
I'm not going to say that couldn't happen, given kind of the development pattern that's already in place. That would be ours to budget like we did Ohio or Schilling or South 9th Street. We have kind of that southern portion is undeveloped ground, and we still have an opportunity to have development pay for its impacts, where that northern portion, there's well, Jacob, if you could go to that other map, just by color coding, you can see, I don't know what color to call that, lavendery, purpley blue, but you can see the big portion is the Great Life Golf Course. So technically, it's not platted and it's not developed, but it's under a use at the moment. There's a little bit of section of Bob Hayworth's property there that is unplatted, undeveloped at this point, and then the remainder is some ground in River Run, kind of down along the river. But the vast majority of that is already developed to the point that it'll just be our project to take on.
Thank you.
So, in doing the resolution, not knowing what the total cost would be, when you put that resolution together, if we didn't put a dollar amount to that, we could put a percentage of what would be considered going to Magnolia Hills to Wheatland, all that would be part of the resolution, setting out the percentages at that time.
So I think what we would envision is that in the petition submitted by Wheatland Valley and Magnolia Hills, it would say that they're agreeing to be responsible for X dollars plus an inflationary factor of 1% per month, for example. And so that would allow that cost to inflate over time.
So 1% per month, that'd be 12% a year?
I was using a for example.
Just going to put it on the credit card.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
But some inflationary factor. And so that petition would be saying we're agreeing to be responsible for that. And so, what we would do is, based on whichever map you choose or a different map that we haven't looked at today, like you can see in the key to each of these, we would say that, of the area that we have defined that benefits from Markley, X percent of that area is Wheatland Valley, for example. And then we'd take that Wheatland Valley percentage times the $5.5 million project cost, and their petition would be for, that plus whatever inflationary factor that we would pick.
And then the assessment would be based on actual cost when the project was incurred, and we'd have the ability to specify the scope of the project so that there was a meeting of the minds on the front end. There wasn't scope creep.
Yeah, so the actual amount that would be assessed would be the lesser of whatever is specified in the resolution that creates the district or the actual total cost.
So the eventual lot owner, property owner, homeowner that's there is not going to have a moving target assessed to them that they won't know at the time they buy the property if the road develops a decade later, or am I not?
What we would do is make sure that we had very clearly described what the cost would be, including that inflationary factor. That would be a percentage, so that if I were to go and buy a piece of property from you in 5 years, I could do the math and calculate what my maximum total special assessment exposure would be. That's the idea. I mean, you would have to do some math in that example. Although if you went with the pre-construction assessments where you picked a maximum number.
That was this 3C.
That was 2B. I know, there's so many.
Yeah, okay.
Probably feels like
Then that would
86
fix
by
that.
now, but yes. And so that would fix an actual dollar amount. And so, somebody could look at the exhibit and say, okay, well, here's my lot that I'm buying, and here's the maximum dollar amount that I would potentially be exposed to.
Thank you.
And we've boiled it down to make it easy. It took us quite a while to get here.
We'll go to comments from the audience.
Ladies first.
Joan Ratzliff, Salina. I have a couple observations, and because I tend to think in ways that maybe other people don't, and whether that is, whatever that says about that. But we've got the strategic plan. It's got several points on it, and every time staff brings something to you, it's going to be supported by it's providing the best possible services and so on and so on. But I want you all to think about how that might affect some of those other things on there, because I think sometimes they're in conflict. So I just want to say that. And the other thing on the assessments, my perspective, I think, is different from a lot of folks, and I want to offer that, and that is that it's we're spending a lot of resources right here. We have spent a lot of resources just thinking about how we're going to have the people, whoever is going to be those folks, how they're going to have to pay for it. And I'm not hearing much today in this discussion about the borrowing that's going on, about the contrast between this, improving a new development area when we have really badly neglected areas all over town. We have crumbling concrete streets. We have sidewalks that are all over the place, non-existent. Really crumbling concrete. that's been in need of replacement for very, very long time. We're not addressing those needs. Instead, we're talking about making improvements on the outskirt, and there are hardworking people who cannot borrow their way by asking everybody else in town to do something for them. You know, hardworking people that know how to live within their means. And when we're constantly talking about borrowing, to me, that is a signal that we're not living within our means, and especially when we see things that are in such disrepair and neglect. So that's my perspective on that. I want you to not approve assessments for future developments, because everybody is going to pay for those infrastructures well into the future, and we're not managing what we have now. We're doing a bad job about a lot of that, the water mains, the streets, and so on. So thank you.
Any other comment?
Good afternoon. Excuse my voice, I've had a cold all week. Kelly Dunn, 2732 Shoreline Drive. Yeah, that's a lot to grasp all day. I learned some new things, and had a couple questions. I think kind of in layman's terms what I'm thinking about this, it could be 5 years, 10 years, it could be 20, it could be 50 years before we get to the traffic count we need. So this is basically a resolution that we file and put on a shelf, and if we need it, we can use it. Is there other possibilities of funding for Markley Road? Could there be a KDOT funding, some other mechanism that comes along in the future, like South Ohio and Magnolia Road?
I'd say it's a possibility. If anything, it'd get applied to the city portion first, in terms of whatever that city allocation would be. But you're correct. The intention would be, now's the opportunity with you as the developer and the property owner to sign the petition, have it recorded, and essentially put on the shelf until the threshold's met, and then we can have a combination of city investment in the improvement and special assessment contribution towards the cost.
I think there's some on, was it Magnolia Road that way? There was a consent not to fight it, and then it ended up being a KDOT
In all honesty, I don't know. Dean may know the history of that, but.
That is correct. All the subdivisions filed consents to special assessments for Magnolia Road, but it was built using KDOT funds.
So I just want to make that clear. That's what I was thinking, that this may not happen. It may or may not happen in the future. I think it was a good point Commissioner Hodges brought up at the study session about the expanded Markley Road area, because I think a lot of people benefit from Markley Road going north, south, whichever way. Everybody's going to go both ways, and everybody in that area would benefit from that. So I myself like option B, but I would just like to see a scenario where we come up to a percentage that we're happy with and get it in place, and kind of go down the road. We've been waiting 4 years now to get our next set of roads in, and we're completely out of lots at Magnolia Hills now, and we're out of lots of other subdivisions, and so I'd just like to see something move forward. That's all I got. If you have any questions, I'll be glad to answer them.
Thank you.
Good evening. John Blanchard, 250 South 9th Street. Just two questions. One is, I thought that was a very succinct presentation. I appreciate that. Just one clarification. The magenta area, the developed area already, would be treated as, it would be unaffected by any type of, would be outside of a benefit.
Yeah, the property owners in there would
district.
not be subject to specials, and the city essentially would carry that cost.
Okay, so the existing homeowners there that have either paid off their special assessments or still have a balance would not see any increase.
Correct.
At all, period.
Correct.
Okay. Great. And then the next question was, on what part of the process are we in now? Are we in the contract negotiation and the making of a contract, and then the resolution would be the final step of making the contract, but are we in the process now of making
Right.
that contract?
Staff's trying to put together the development agreement that's called for in the subdivision regulations in order to allow approval of a plat on a direct access perimeter street that does not meet current standard, meet the standard. So that agreement would put in place the means to how we're going to get to meet the standard. If that agreement's acceptable, then we can proceed to the
So
resolution.
this discussion, I mean, it was termed a discussion on the agenda, is not to amend the policy in any way. So this won't be per se a policy change to the,
Right.
but it would be nevertheless setting a precedent.
Yeah, I'd say that's accurate. The subdivision regulation language, I think, contemplates consents to specials, and we're taking the 12.6A.4C approach, but other than that, this is intended to be responsive to the developer's request for an agreement with the city commission for a plan to get the road improved, and it potentially would be precedent setting just in terms of it's the first one we've done.
And then just, thank you for that, it's very, very helpful. And just as a governing body, as a person that is investing in the core of the community and that very rarely has any occasion whatsoever to use that road because it certainly serves a lot of residential purposes, I would ask that you respect the taxpayers and put a fair value on that. I know before, did you say it was set 30/70 at 10 trips, 10 average trips? At 13 average trips, it turns into 60/40. So I would just ask you that you find a fair rate for the taxpayers. Thank you.
Well,
I
go ahead.
was just going to ask at some point, could we take a 5-minute break for
take it-
restroom break?
We can take it now. Okay. Recess for 5 minutes. Yeah, I figured if I did it in purple, then I think I wanted to emphasize that we're doing dark blue.
You know what my problem is? My notes are all over the place, so I couldn't talk.
That's when you're having fun here, I guess. Okay. Oh. Okay, so we are back in session. So we are actually at, this is a discussion. Do we feel we need more information on this, or is there a time specific where all this information is synthesized and
Well, there is a
turned into proposal?
an ongoing sense of urgency to try to keep this moving forward. And so we characterize it as a discussion, and if we could get some consensus or direction from you, then staff can prepare a development agreement. We'd have one for the developers of Wheatland Valley, and we'd have one for the developers of Magnolia Hills, and we could bring that back to you for final action at that point. But the two decision points called out in the staff report are really kind of driving how that development agreement would have to be written. And then if you have any guidance or feedback on the interest accumulation scenario, that would be helpful as well. With those three pieces of information, then I think staff and legal counsel have what we need to bring you back a draft.
To make a motion, though, do we have to have one motion for the option A or B, and then one motion for?
I think that could go either way. If you, as the mover, have an opinion about both of them, you could certainly make that motion. If it fails, you're kind of mixing and matching, but...
Well, given our history of mixing and matching unsuccessfully, I think Gus broke apart. Staff has suggested the benefit district boundaries got a number one by it. Maybe we just, Mayor, discuss that piece first.
Well, right, are we comfortable discussing it right now to the point of making a motion, or is anyone here who feels strongly enough that they want to think about it?
I mean, I think, how much more I don't think my
I'm
brain can
just
absorb
asking
much
because-
more information.
Okay, so if we're ready to make a decision, now we can go to the individual
Well, I think it's
items.
important we make a decision,
Yeah.
because these guys have been waiting too long. I mean, that's all on us, it's on the city.
So the most basic question, first question you need answered, Mr. Scragg, is?
The boundaries of the benefit district. And not to confuse it further, but at the break, there was a realization that if that portion in the corner of Magnolia and Markley were to develop with a configuration towards Markley, we would have an opportunity to tell them they need to enter into a 12-6A 4C agreement because they're benefiting from Markley. And I don't think that any of the rest of the district would complain because it's going to spread that cost out.
So we can do that after the fact?
I think there would be an opportunity if it turns out that instead of going to Markley, instead of going to Magnolia, it's developing towards Markley, we could get them added.
And I can't remember the size of that, but depending on the size, I could see it having two exit points, one onto
that's
Markley and one
possible,
onto
too.
Magnolia, and that's why I would hate to not have the ability to say, you're going to, you're
Right.
going to benefit from that, you should be able to, should pay
And
also.
we did confer, and since it would be broadening the district and spreading the cost out amongst more parties, we can't imagine that would meet with opposition if out in the future we realize that. So, in answer to your question, yes, staff's recommendation is that area that corresponds more directly with the direct access perimeter street, which is the smaller of the two.
I guess to start that discussion, I is having to defend doing a benefit district. I do believe that option A makes the most sense. Although, as we get into discussing the percentages, because we've looked at that, it's made me take a look, and I think that'll play into some of my thought process there. But I do believe that it gets convoluted when we start looking out to some of those areas because they do have the ability to go north and not have a direct benefit. And I think I've made so many notes here, but I think one of the things we looked at was, we use the word direct access perimeter street. And personally, when we were talking about this, that's the way I envisioned it, was being a direct perimeter access street. So because of that, I guess I support option A.
I'm with you. I mean, since it's that specific area, I'm fine with option A.
I'd just like to, and this may be a real picky little point, when Mr. Blanchard asked about this being just a discussion today, did your answer imply that we weren't going to go to this stage? Or, Mr. Blanchard, not to put you on the spot, were you under the impression that we were not going to go further than the discussion stage?
Thank you. Hopefully this will clarify. I think the city manager was correct. I think that your task here is direction and consensus. Mine was just, are we in a policy amendment mode, or are we in a making of a contract mode? And we're in the making of a contract mode.
All right, thank you.
Thanks.
All right. I just need someone to use the word move, M-O-V-E, in front of whatever they said.
Mayor Davis, I move we approve the Markley Road benefit area being that of option A.
And plus the southern
Plus,
section.
okay. Do you want to say? Always makes me nervous when the attorney, when I'm talking to the attorney stands up.
The Greg Binkson, legal counsel for the city. Unless there's someone more expert here at any given time. And I appreciate the chance to address the point that I want to make clear, or at least pursue a line along the line of Mr. Blanchard's point. I don't know that it's frankly so clear at this juncture. You're dealing with a policy question as it relates to the ultimate negotiation of a contract with, at present, I believe, 2 of the potential developers that would be affected by these decisions. I'm saying that so anybody can stop me if I'm incorrect along the way. The thing that we do have to be watchful for, and I do feel a need to just be absolutely sure, given the point that has been raised about the policy versus contract circumstance. And I know Mr. Byquist is here, and I probably need to defer to him to verify for us the party that would be entering into the potential development agreement with the city as it relates to the Magnolia Hills property. The reason I say that, we know it's certainly been discussed in prior contexts, that Commissioner Ryan has a substantial interest in Kelly Dunn Construction, Inc. It's my understanding that that is not a party, or that entity is not a party to this development, given the ownership, or my understanding of the ownership and my understanding of the plan going forward. But inasmuch as we don't really have, by my understanding, the formal application or the exactly who will be entering into that contract with the city, I felt compelled to ask Mr. Byquist if he would confirm that for us to be sure that we're not in a substantial interest scenario as it would relate to that potential contract. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stan Byquist, 2601 South Ohio. The contract that we're looking at would be with Magnolia Hills Incorporated. That is a Kansas company. There are 3 individuals in that, and that is Kelly Dunn, myself, Stan Byquist, and Jim Markle. And I guess that's, I'll take any questions now, but that's the makeup of our company.
If I could, I guess, defer the questions on our behalf back to the city attorney.
No, I think that was the
Satisfied. Okay.
critical element. We certainly have a different situation if it were to be Kelly Dunn Construction, Inc., as far as Commissioner Ryan's ability to, or lack of ability to participate in the making of that contract. So I appreciate the chance to confirm that.
I appreciate you bringing it up. It just never occurred to me. It's always been my knowledge that it was Magnolia Hills, so,
Thank you.
yeah, thank you.
All righty. I know I heard the word move once. Did I hear it twice? Okay.
Do we have a set? I don't know. I made.
Could we have the motion
So
repeated? Yeah.
were we considering adding the southern, that southern?
We don't have to. They said they can add that at
Yeah,
a
I
later
think
date.
if it develops in a way that's oriented to Markley in the future, we could do it at that time.
Thank you.
You want me to read that again?
Are there any changes that would have to occur on Magnolia if it orients to Magnolia? I mean, as far as its
Well, we would still
status
apply,
as
on the assumption that they annex in and they're subject to our subdivision regulations and we treat Magnolia as their perimeter street, and we'd have this same type of conversation before they'd be approved for plating.
Sounds fun. Okay. All right. Thank you. All right. I'll keep quiet and go for it.
Okay, try this again. Mayor Davis, I move that we approve the Markley Road benefit area as option A as presented to us.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve option A for Markley Road. Is there any more discussion, questions? All right, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 5-0. Second most important information that you need to know, or we need to decide on
The
is...
percentage allocations,
Thank you.
I can speak to that, but I think we've walked you through the math. I'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. The one thing that I guess I would note is the traffic counts, whether they're KDOT or their city public works department, are 24-hour periods on weekdays. And so as we try to gather information, it would be, for KDOT, it would be a Tuesday through a Thursday that they typically take those counts.
And that was putting us at somewhere near the 60/40 range?
Correct. The KDOT information and the, combined with our Public Works Department traffic counts for Magnolia Hills was at the 60/40 range.
And when we do talk about the 60/40 range, actually, when you start to look at the adjusted annual cost, and because we have to pick up the unplatted area.
Actually,
this
the platted
point-
area, but yes.
Yeah, it looks more like, even though we call it the 60/40 split, at this point, it looks like 67 and some change and nearly 33%, right?
Correct. It starts with that 60/40, and then that 40 has to be allocated to
Right.
the benefit district. And
Right.
the platted developed property in the magenta would be, that cost would be
Right.
carried by the city. And when we carry that in addition to the 60, then you're at 67.31%.
In my opinion, it ought to favor more 75-25. I think the numbers aren't strong enough there. You come down with 27.5%, but you're assessing on a weekday, and there was other construction in the area. I would argue that there were a number of vehicles moving in and out of the subdivision to service the homes being constructed. So I would argue to move the other direction and be at 75-25.
I guess the only reason I might think that number will shift back down, it's still a relatively geographically isolated part of the city, which means folks are going to have to use their cars more to go in and out. But after I looked at my own house, I mean, 15 trips, that's so easy to do. I mean, there's a lot of pass-through traffic, because someone in our house passes through there twice every day. We don't even live there, but our dog goes to school near there, so we have to pass through. But it's
And one
there's
of
a
the,
lot more traffic coming.
Yeah. And I have actually gone out there and sat and kind of watched the traffic flow just for my own benefit to kind of get a feel for what's going on. One of the things that made me start thinking a little bit about the percentages was based on Commissioner Hodges' idea of expanding that area. And so I kind of looked at the traffic count and what we had in 2016. And if you go down towards
You go down towards Cedar Ridge and River Run and Grand Prairie, all of those have added significant amount of homes since then, and they still have a significant amount of homes to add, even though they're not part of this benefit district. A lot of those homes are going to go to Markley if they're going to go to Dillon's on Ohio Street, because that's the shortest way probably, if they go to the mall, that area. So I think actually there's an additional traffic from areas that are under construction that are not part of the benefit district. It also, City Manager Scragg made the comment that this was done under a Tuesday, Thursday, when it was a low traffic count. And again, I think you start looking at the summer months with the baseball, softball, golf. Now you have Barkley Park out there. I think the 60/40 is probably, and again, you're trying to be fair and equitable, and I agree. You're trying to be fair and equitable to the taxpayer, but I think you got to be fair and equitable to the individuals that live in that area also. So I'm probably more at 80/20, 75/25, just as I think about it through my mind. I sat out there one day for about 45 minutes. I had my packet to read. I finished playing golf, so I sat over there and crossed the street, and there was approximately 85 cars that went by, and 2 pulled into the current Magnolia Hills and 1 pulled out. So don't know if that was just on a Saturday afternoon, so that was, that's not any scientific at all, but it was just amazing the number of cars that use that as a pass through from north to south.
I agree, it's a lot of pass-through, but the number of homes in there will potentially quadruple. If it's just the folks who live there now, Markley's probably fine, but the increased need, the increased danger is going to come from the additional 300 houses that are coming, and the people coming to visit those folks. I think the traffic numbers will go up. And Ms. Rasleff's comments are not taken lightly. If we can save some money that we don't need to spend, we probably can use it elsewhere. This money will be slow coming in, but I think there's going to be a fair amount of traffic, and there's the potential that corner lot is commercial, or can be part of it, if I'm not mistaken.
By our future land use map, I don't believe so.
I thought it.
Markley Magnolia Corner shown as a neighborhood center, so it could be mixed use. It also could have some neighborhood commercial type uses that support the neighborhood, but that particular intersection is shown as a neighborhood center in the future.
So, which would increase the demands on just traffic flow on Markley. 10 years, there'll be a light there. But as it's not proper for me to make a motion.
And I guess the final thing I'd like to say, and I don't think I'm going to prevail on this at all, but just to throw this out there, choosing to live in these beautiful new developments, it's a choice. It's a choice, and it's a choice that comes with consequences, just like, and I think I said this in a study session a few weeks ago, it's whether you choose to live in the core, that comes with its own set of consequences. If you choose to live in an old house, if you choose to live in a new subdivision, that comes with consequences and costs. So, I'm really stuck on 60/40 because, with our carrying costs and everything, it still comes out to, it could take, we might not recover that for 20 years until the land is platted. So I'm still for 60/40.
Yeah, I guess, and part of mine is, the comp plan shows this being an area of growth also. And what I get concerned about is if we penalize ourselves too much, do we see leapfrog development where individuals go out and they start building the country? Well, then they're still coming in and driving on Markley and Magnolia roads, but not paying local taxes too. So there's not a good answer, I'll tell you, in 10, 20 years.
Any answer we come up with, I think, probably needs to look at our debt limit. Yeah, we may have one of those cosmic close encounters in a couple of years here.
And again, I think I would hope that we would, at some point, hopefully, as we move forward to having to do something to Markley Road, not knowing where that is, that we would, look at KDOT funds to help with the city funding. I would think that would be that's what we've done on Markley, Magnolia, that's what we've done on Ohio Street. So I'd like to think that at some point we're able to find some KDOT funds that would greatly help the city side of the equation also.
Proper etiquette would say that one of the four of you would make a motion. If not, we'll be here next Monday.
Okay, I'll just throw this out there. Mayor Davis, I move that we adopt the Markley Road cost allocation scenario of 60/40 as presented by staff.
No second? Okay. Motion dies for lack of a second. Is there another motion? Would you like to
Mayor
revisit? Go ahead.
Davis, I move that we allocate the Markley Road cost allocation at a scenario of 25-75.
You may want to specify which is which.
75 city at large, 25 benefit area.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to allocate the Markley Road assessment at 75% city, 25% development, for lack of a better term. Any more discussion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed?
Nay.
Nay. Motion carries 3-2.
And we will build in a inflationary number into that, correct?
That is certainly another topic that you can provide guidance. If that's the general consensus, we can draft it based on an inflationary factor to be applied either monthly or annually.
We should do that now?
Well, if you have direction about a preference, now would be the time to let us know.
The decision here is whether or not to go ahead and establish a cost and apply the inflation factor, or to actually
Set a number.
set a number.
Right.
Do we have the collective experience to know what that number is?
Well, what we could do is take this number and then try to
Collective
project that
knowledge.
forward.
We don't know inflation.
Yeah, I think we could take the number we have today and then try to project it forward a specified amount of time. But strategically, I think, and I have to lean on Gina here, is the difference in our kind of legal position. If we do the inflation approach, that probably covers our bottom line better versus some specified dollar amount that may or may not hit the number correctly. Would you be willing to kind of characterize our legal position differences between those two scenarios?
Yeah, so I think you've got it exactly right. And if we had some direction, I'll let you tell me if you're thinking something different here, but if we had some direction from you about whether to come back with a process that would have the inflation factor in it, or to come back to you with a maximum number, I think then we could work together to figure out what the inflation factor would need to be if you chose that option, or what that maximum number should be if that's the direction that you gave us. But really, in order to move forward with sort of this next step in the process, we need to know which of those two paths you'd prefer to go. And I'd be happy to go over, sort of the pros and cons of those two again, if you'd like for me to.
So you would just need direction from us, which one, not specific to telling you.
Yeah, you don't need to give us, we want you to put 1% per month, or we want you to put $10 million. I think we can come back to you with something that, that we feel like is reasonable. But if you could tell us which of those two directions to go, I think we can come back to you with the right thing.
Can we reach a consensus on that? Okay, someone want to start it off?
Which is more appropriate, or is there a more?
In the past, the city has done the fixed.
Well, in the past, we've always done the improvement, shortly after the passage, finalized the cost and assessed it. So we haven't found ourselves in a situation where we're trying to lay the groundwork for an improvement that's years into the future.
Well, if I
So-
were a consumer, I think that I would like to know a fixed number rather than know something could inflate, so goes to the marketability of the property possibly.
But Ms. Rekoff did say that that's something that could be figured out in term, I'm sure by like the title company or the realtor or the developer, something like that, if you know you're buying your lot, that,
The one unknown in the interest scenario would be, you know all the math, but you don't know when the improvement's going to be made.
Right.
So I'm buying it today, and if I think it's going to happen in 5 years, I can calculate that cost. But if I think it's going to be 10, 15, 20, that's a different number. So
Right.
you understand the math, and you can kind of assess our application of inflation, but you won't, in that inflation scenario, you wouldn't know the absolute number till the project was completed.
and if we do establish an absolute number, I mean, is that, and I think you answered this before, and I apologize, but there would be an element of inflation added to that absolute number?
Sure.
Being if it's $5 million today and we don't think it's going to be for another 5 years, then maybe we put the absolute number at 7.5, and I'm just
Right.
throwing out numbers.
Right.
So that's the way that would be approached.
Yep. And from a buyer's perspective, you then know the top end, and it might come in less. And then from a procedural standpoint, we're able to completely kind of button up the benefit district versus have it left for that final assessment to be addressed.
The motion from the-
That's correct, although, I will say that that does leave open the risk that we didn't set that number
Right.
high enough. And so then, the city would pay the overage, if you will.
Does it affect your ability to button up the benefit district, either scenario?
You would be able to finish all of the final processes now, today, or, in the coming months, if you picked a top dollar amount as opposed to picking the inflationary factor.
So that would be faster, a faster solution to this?
If you wanted to know that you had gone through both steps and you were completely done today, yes, that's true. Would you have everything that you would be doing today done faster if we didn't do that? Yeah, absolutely, because you'd only do the first step in the process and not the second step of actually levying the assessments. So I'm not sure what.
Well, I think there's some demand out there, and I think these guys would like to get to work, and they may feel that they may be put out of business if they're not having streets. So is one scenario or the other allow the process to move forward quicker?
The process of actually levying the special assessments would not be very time-consuming. I think we could get that done in, I don't have a calendar in front of me, but, 45 to 60 days after you had created the district, then we could have the special assessments levied. Given sort of where we're at in the year, we're probably doing that during the time period where, they could still move forward with everything. I don't think they're selling off lots at this point in the process because they still have their internal improvements to do. And frankly, I'm not sure that timing would necessarily be held up because we would, for the internal street improvements and the internal water lines, et cetera, we would be going. We would have some other processes that we would need to follow for that too. So I'm not sure that choosing one over the other would hold up their process.
Is it labor intensive to produce both scenarios, knowing that you're only going to use one?
Oh, that's what we're here for.
Let's just decide
Well, I mean, if we can't decide, I mean, if we need to see them on paper and then decide.
There's 5 of us. We can decide one way or the other.
Okay, well, that,
If you were to-
I need one of the 4 to make a move.
If you were to use the cost, you're sitting there saying, okay, we think we're going to have to do it, and, the maximum cost, or you're having to put a time frame on when you think that's going to happen. And if you miss that, then we're putting the city at large. I'm okay, I went with 75-25, but I still like maybe the inflationary deal built in it. I think it protects the city to keep it at that 75-25. If you don't, you could put a max, and if costs go up significantly, then that 75-25 is out of whack. Am I not correct?
No, that's definitely true.
Is that a motion? I just need one opinion with conviction.
I would move that we approve, let's see.
You can just instruct staff to draft the agreement
Instruct staff to
provide for an inflation factor.
So moved.
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to instruct the staff to, I'm going to say this wrong probably.
To draft the development agreement to include an inflation factor.
That's exactly what I wanted to say. Thank you. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries 5-0. We thank all involved for this process. I'm sorry. Out of the executive? Oh, yes. Yeah. Okay, is there any other business before we have our other business? All right. Commissioner Hodges, if you would.
How long do you anticipate needing, 10 minutes or 15?
15? Apparently 15. I was going to say 20.
20
I don't know, I'm looking down the row. I think we feel fast tonight. 20? Okay, all right.
Yeah, I think so.
All right, and I'm going to need the gentleman on my left to start calculating what that puts us at. I move the City Commission recess into executive session for 20 minutes to discuss the subjects of negotiations with Saline County relating to the Expo Center lease agreement with legal counsel based upon the need for consultation with an attorney for the public body which would be deemed privileged in the attorney-client relationship pursuant to KSA 45-7319B2, and for the reason that the public discussion of the matter would adversely affect the interests of the city. The open meeting will resume in this room at 7:10 p.m.
Second.
Okay, and one Commissioner Hay will need to be excused from the meeting, so there will be just 4 of us in the meeting.
And there is the possibility of public action when we return.
Yes. All right, all in favor of recessing to executive session, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.